Member for Calgary-Hays.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today on the government's motion 17, and I think it's. I'm going to open with a couple minutes by talking about what this isn't, because I think that's as important as what this is. What this is not is this Legislative Assembly making a decision on physician-assisted death. That's been done. And I think it's important to make that clear. That was done a year ago by the Supreme Court of Canada. That's right. And at that point, the Supreme Court of Canada served notice to Canada's national government that they had a full year till June 6th of this year to put in rules around physician-assisted death, or it would be done for them. So that is, we're not talking about whether we agree with physician-assisted death, because we have no authority over that. That is done. And nonetheless, Mr. Speaker, this is a watershed moment in Canadian history. Well, I'm not a big fan of the courts making law. I think what's often true, not always true, but often true, is when the courts end up making a law because of a dispute that gets to the Supreme Court of Canada. Very often those decisions change the course of history in Canada and change things permanently that may not have been changed if those decisions were made through any type of political process, with any type of government, with any legislature, including the Parliament in Ottawa. But this is important, as my colleagues that have risen have said, and because it is life and death, and it can never be taken lightly and never should be. And this is exactly where unfortunately, my unhappiness with the government's actions really reaches a peak. Knowing that this was coming for a year, the government dropped this motion on the table yesterday, 7 days. 7 days before physician-assisted death would become the law of the land. 2 days before the scheduled end of the Legislative Assembly. I couldn't think of anything less disrespectful that this government could offer up to the citizens of Alberta, to leave a life and death issue that they've known about for a year on the table without bringing it forward till this late date. Incredibly disrespectful to Albertans. Now, when we asked, and we did ask, and to the government's credit, that we got some of the potential draft regulations around it. And here's the problem. These regulations should have been out in public circulation 6 months ago, Mr. Speaker. Because regardless of what they decided in Ottawa on how to do it, the fact is the court was going to make this happen. This should have been out for all 87 members of this House to discuss with our constituents months ago, probably 6 months ago. And while this isn't the final word on it, looking at the proposed text for directive from Alberta Health Services, it is pursuant to Section 8, I'll read some of it to you, Mr. Speaker, because it's relevant. Pursuant to Section 8 of the Regional Health Authorities Act I, and it names the minister, which I can't say the minister's name in the House, Minister of Health and Minister of Seniors direct as follows. That minister hasn't been Minister of Seniors since Groundhog Day, since February 2nd. Wow. 4 months ago yesterday. What is that? So, Mr. Speaker, if indeed, and I'll be looking for an explanation from the government, but if indeed the government and the cabinet had these draft regulations in their hands 4 months ago, why the heck didn't Albertans have them in their hands?
That's the question.
Why didn't Albertans have 4 months to talk to their members of the Legislative Assembly to say, I don't like this, I do like that, this is really important, thanks for including it, and have you thought of this, and this could cause an unnecessary death or an unnecessary pain for someone who is qualified. Disgraceful. Disgraceful. I can't imagine, Mr. Speaker, anything more arrogant than a government to inflict upon Albertans the conditions on which they or a loved one of theirs might receive physician-assisted death, with 2 days to discuss it in the House, 7 days for all Albertans to really discuss it, and most of that after the House is recessed. Disgraceful, disgusting, disingenuous political manipulation, Mr. Speaker. And I know that's a terrible thing I just said, but I believe it. To have something like this and drop it on the table at the last day without any chance for Albertans to give their opinion on a life and death matter is probably the worst and lowest form of political manipulation that I've seen. Terrible. Absolutely terrible. So, Mr. Speaker, you can't excuse that. You cannot excuse that. And I know the folks in Ottawa have been some, you know what, they left it to the last minute. But that is not an excuse for our province. It's not an excuse for our government, who knew this was coming. This was not a surprise. They had a full year. They had a full year. And in fact, it would seem by the documents that at least 4 months ago, the government had drafts of potential regulations in hand. And even if a minister stands up later and says, well, this was done last week and that's a typo, that's still not an excuse. They should have had something in hand 6 months ago. Great. They should have shared it with Albertans. Great. This should have been a nonpartisan Albertan discussion about our future. Because no matter what political party you belong to, and if you don't belong to a political party, no matter what religion you belong to, and if you don't belong to a religion, no matter where you come from in the world, no matter what your sexual orientation is, no matter what your nationality is, no matter where you were born, it's personal. Agreed. When someone in your life is considering their options at death, it gets personal. Which is why I am so very offended by the fact that the government left this to the last minute when they knew it was coming. They knew it was coming. And you know what? Unfortunately, it's indicative of the government's attitude that we know better than Albertans. Consistent throughout the entire time since they've been government. We know better. Do it our way. You don't need to know any of the facts there, little Albertans. We'll just pat Albertans on the head because we know better. You know what? Albertans know better. They always have, and they always will. And they surely know better about the things they're thinking about during the end of life for a loved one. So, Mr. Speaker, I could not be more offended. And the saddest thing about this, it's too late to fix it. If the government did something really rare for this government and admitted they were wrong, and I don't know whether they will or not, but even if they did, it's too late. It's law in 6 days from now. It's done. It's over. You blew it. There's no coming back from this one. There's other legislation that they've made mistakes on that they could come back from by talking to the public. There's not time to have a province-wide decent debate. And I know I heard the minister today talk about 15,000 people answered the survey. Well, good. They got that, might have got that little bit right. Less than 1%. But that's less than 1% of the population. But that is about what they'd like to see. But in terms of the draft regulations, 0 Albertans. Well, maybe the ones on the government side. Outside of this House, 0 Albertans were consulted on what the regulations are. 0. On a life and death matter, 0 Albertans outside of the political process were shown the regulations. Zilch, 0, nada, none on a life and death issue. This isn't whether we're going to paint the house blue or red. This is about end of life and death decisions about our loved ones. This is about the pressure that medical staff are going to be under to do or not do these procedures. This is about the incredible pressure that families will be under, and this government says, with all of that, we know better than them. We know better than the doctors and the nurses and the other staff in the medical facilities. We know better than the families and the loved ones. We know better than Albertans, because we have the power, and we're wielding it, bless our hearts, to put these regulations in place with 0 time for a decent discussion. Mr. Speaker, the government has blown it. They've blown it in a really serious, offensive way that you cannot come back from.